Can Ativan cause addiction? Yes, it can. Let me just describe though. Ativan is in a class of drugs known as the benzodiazepines, and this also includes Valium, Versed, and Xanax, amongst others. Ativan is the more commonly prescribed one. This is used now because it is a shorter acting drug compared to Valium. It's typically dosed at 1 milligram every 8 to 12 hours, and it's used for extreme anxiety or panic attacks. It's only good for short-term use because this can develop a dependency in users. There's much better, newer classes of antidepressants and anxiety medications out there that are not as dangerous. They don't have a dependency syndrome, and there's minimal withdrawal from it as well. So yes, Ativan can cause addiction because over a prolonged period of use, the body becomes accustomed to it. This causes a change in the neurotransmitters in the brain. The balance is off, and then if they suddenly stop using it, it can precipitate a withdrawal reaction where the body the brain is no longer with it, and it goes through a withdrawal syndrome where it's very, very uncomfortable, and all the positive things that the drug provided to this person is now the opposite. So in withdrawal, it is the opposite of what the drug caused in the first place. So now we're talking about agitation, paranoia, personality changes, irritability, and that's a sign of true dependency and possible addiction. Addiction implies that there's probably behavioral changes like manipulativeness, lying and deceiving others. That's generally the difference between the dependency and addiction. But that being said, yes, Ativan can cause addiction, and the best way to avoid this is to use it sparingly, as prescribed, and to minimize how much you're using. Thank you. What is an Ativan addiction? Well, first of all, Ativan is in a class of drugs known as the benzodiazepines. This also includes Valium and Xanax. Ativan is most commonly used nowadays for short-term treatment of anxiety. It could also be used for alcohol withdrawal syndromes, but the idea is to use it only in short-term dosing. The reason why is because it can cause an addiction if used for a longer period of time or in high doses. So the way to avoid an addiction is simply to use it as prescribed, to take minimal doses of it, and to avoid any sort of escalation in the dose. If you're having problems where it's just not cutting it, then to see your family doctor for a different drug treatment altogether. Like I said, there's the newer classes of anxiety medications out there, and these are much safer to take. Also, there's no dependency for them, and although there can be a little bit of a withdrawal syndrome if they're ceased suddenly, but the newer classes of drugs are much safer to take and work better than Ativan. What does an Ativan addiction feel like? Ativan is in the class of benzodiazepines, which also includes Valium and Xanax. These are older drugs that are not used as commonly, but sometimes they're used for short-term treatment of anxiety or panic attacks. The addiction is only picked up after fairly prolonged use, so we're talking about longer than a month and in fairly high doses. So Ativan is typically given at 1 milligram every 8 to 12 hours. And if someone's taking that as prescribed, it's unlikely they're going to feel any sort of withdrawal. But that's what an addiction feels like, is when a person suddenly stops the medication, it is met with the onset of a withdrawal syndrome. The withdrawal syndrome is, especially for Ativan or any other benzodiazepine, is highlighted by agitation, severe anxiety, irritability, discomfort, paranoia, sense of impending doom. Any of those are the above. Those are signs of a withdrawal syndrome. It's affecting their psychology, and we have a very anxious person. And so this is where it doesn't make any sense to put people on these medications, because if they suddenly stop it or suddenly withdraw, that it can cause pretty significant effects that we were trying to stop in the first place. That's why there's newer classes of anti-anxiety medications out there that are much safer to take, that don't have a withdrawal syndrome, and you should speak to your healthcare provider about it if you're concerned about anxiety. What does withdrawal from Ativan feel like? Withdrawal from any of these drugs in the same class, whether it's Valium, Ativan, Midazolam, or Versed, Xanax is another one. Any sort of withdrawal from these is a very uncomfortable situation in which the person is highly anxious and agitated. It usually starts about about a day after ceasing taking the last pill. So this withdrawal syndrome is very uncomfortable. The person's agitated, as I said. They may not understand why it is that they're agitated if this is their first go at it. And it's a very uncomfortable situation. Now this all goes away if they take another Ativan. This is where it's very dangerous, because now the person can become dependent on the Ativan. They go through withdrawal, and to avoid withdrawal, now they're taking more Ativan. So this can spiral out of control and pave the way to worsening addiction. The way to avoid feeling withdrawals is to slowly wean off of it. Generally, it's better to do this at the discretion of your healthcare provider, and to avoid abruptly stopping or cessation of the treatment.